What inspired you to write this book?
AI dynamics were certainly one, but next to that, it was chips aren't just about AI. They're not just about trade flows. They're also about power in the modern world.
The theme that you touched upon is very, very relevant, and it looks like you almost kind of saw into the future. How did that happen?
You could already tell 5 years ago even that if you wanted better AI systems, you're going to need better semiconductors. And this is why companies like NVIDIA have been investing for over a decade in.
Where do we stand right now?
The reality is there's always a race going on in the chip industry.
Isn't it better if they just collaborate with the ones who are making the best?
NVIDIA wants to make money on every chip that it sells, so they charge a lot. And if you're Microsoft, Meta, Google, Amazon, they're all building their own processors. And I think this is a trend that's going to expand even further over the coming years because...
Can you talk about TSMC? Where are they right now?
They manufacture 99% of the world's AI accelerators.
But isn't China a country who would come up with a solution despite that?
Unlike most industries where you try to improve by 5 or 10% a year, in the chip industry, you need to improve by 50% a year.
Why is that Russia, who's still not anywhere heard in this whole market, right?
But the big challenge that Russia's faced is that it's tried to...
Speaking about these geopolitical tensions that's been happening with US and China, what kind of started this whole thing?
There are two key factors that started it. One is that, the second factor is that...
Who are you secretly rooting for in this war of the most critical technology? Welcome to a new episode of Tech Talks. I'm Vandana Nair, Senior Tech Journalist at AI Media House. Today I have with me Professor of International History at Fletcher School, Tufts University, who's also the acclaimed author of the New York Times bestseller, Chip War, The Fight for the World's Most Critical Technology, Chris Miller. Hello, Chris. Welcome to our show.
Well, thank you for having me.
How are you doing and how is Bengaluru treating you?
I'm excited to be here. It's been a fun 2 days at the VLSI conference, and it's great to see all the enthusiasm about chip design that's here at the conference.
All right. Thank you, Chris. I want to just talk about this amazing comment I read about chip war. It said, spice of the real world, and which got me thinking, are we in some sort of a spice war on the planet Arrakis?
Well, I think over the last couple of years, people have come to realize just the absolute centrality of semiconductors in our daily lives, but also in driving technology forwards. So there are certainly semiconductors in everything, your phone, your computer, cars, household appliances. But if you look at AI in particular, it's better semiconductors that are driving AI progress. And you see this most vividly with NVIDIA's GPUs, which are getting better at an extraordinary rate and are enabling all of the new AI models that we're seeing right now. And that's put semiconductors really at the centerpiece of all technology, because all of the biggest tech companies, from Facebook to OpenAI, they're all depending on these advanced chips.
Okay. So when you wrote this book, it was at a pre-chat GPT era,
That's
I would
right.
say. But however, the theme that you touched upon is very, very relevant. And it looks like you almost kind of preempted it, or you kind of saw into the future. How did that happen?
Well, you could already tell 5 years ago even that if you wanted better AI systems, you're going to need better semiconductors. And this is why companies like NVIDIA have been investing for over a decade in building the types of specialized processors that AI requires. So nobody knew exactly when the moment would happen, when everyone else realized just how powerful these AI tools would be. But the basic dynamic of needing more processing power to build better AI systems, that's been a long-term trend.
Okay. So this was something that would eventually happen, right? With the way the technology advancements are happening.
I think that's right. I think the way LLMs have burst onto the scene was certainly a surprise, but you can chart back not just a couple of years, but actually over a decade and look at how better AI systems have needed more and more data for training, and therefore needed more and more processing power to make it possible.
Got it. So a little bit about chip war. So what made you, or what inspired you to write this book?
I think there were a couple different reasons why it appeared to me that semiconductors were really at the center of understanding everything that was happening in the world. The AI dynamics were certainly one, but next to that, it was global economic shifts. The largest flow of goods in all global trade is the flow of chips into China every single year. So you really can't understand how the global economy works without putting semiconductors at the center of your analysis. And that explains why today governments around the world, all of the world's major economies, are fixated on this issue, because they recognize chips aren't just about AI. They're not just about trade flows. They're also about power in the modern world. And that's why you see leaders from Xi Jinping in China to Joe Biden in the United States fixated on semiconductors.
So do you think they kind of had this late realization, or I mean, say like right now, where some of them have the power to control them, and the others are kind of trying to do a catch-up kind of a game. So do you think they're late to the race, or where do we stand right now?
Well, I think certainly a lot of people have been catching up over the last couple of years, but the reality is there's always a race going on in the chip industry because the technology improves so rapidly that if you're not running forward, you're going to fall behind. And so the race dynamic is intensified right now because of all the politics around it. But for the companies, their view is they've been racing since the first chips were invented, and the only way to keep their business is to keep racing ahead of their competitors.
So how are they managing it? Like, say, the ones who have the power right now, like say in Taiwan, with respect to companies, TSMC and those kind?
Well, the challenge is that they've got to deliver better technology at an exponential rate. That's what Moore's law, which has determined the history of the chip industry, dictates. And it's really, really hard to do. They need to invest extraordinary sums in R&D. They need to develop cultures of innovation that let them develop new technology every year. And there's always risk that they could mess up. And if you just have 1 year of problems, you can fall behind your competitors, which means that the companies that are able to create these cultures of innovation and drive innovation every single year have really unique advantages of their competitors because it's that R&D that makes their products valuable.
Got it. And you spoke about Moore's law. I think now we're going beyond Moore's law, the way with the compute power, everything's coming out. So are we able to catch up to that speed in terms of, say, the resources and the inputs that's required for it?
I think Moore's law is changing, is the way I would describe it. The traditional way of Moore's law was just to make all the components on chips smaller and smaller and smaller. And that's getting really hard to do because we're already at virus size in terms of the smallest components on chips. So now we're stacking them three-dimensionally, for example, or packaging them together in new ways to allow faster data interconnect between them. So there's new techniques we have to rely on. But if you look at the cost of computing, it's still falling. And if you look at the capabilities of the most advanced chips, it's still rising very rapidly. And ultimately, that's what matters rather than how exactly we deliver the performance improvements.
So do you see that, say, post-ChatGPT, a lot of companies are now actively investing in producing chips? And it's not just from the geopolitical angle, it's also from the business point of view. Like, you're going to have a huge market over there.
Yeah, no, that's right. I think the growth in NVIDIA shows the market size. And right now we're seeing a big trend, not only of chip makers designing new chips, but also tech companies that previously hadn't been involved in semiconductors designing their own in-house chips. Microsoft, Meta, Google, Amazon, they're all building their own processors. And I think this is a trend that's going to expand even further over the coming years because companies are realizing if they want to harness AI, specialized silicon that's designed around their specific workloads can reduce the power consumption and reduce the cost of running AI in the systems.
So, but from a business point of view, like how these big tech are creating the chips as well, isn't it better if they just collaborate with the ones who are kind of making the best? Because these guys would also have some time to scale, to understand, to get to the level that, the already incumbent players have.
Well, I think you're right that those factors do provide advantages to companies that only focus on chip making, but there are disadvantages as well. So if you want to design your own chips, you can design them exactly around the workloads you're running. Whereas if you buy from NVIDIA, they give you a general purpose GPU for AI applications. The second dynamic is cost. NVIDIA wants to make money on every chip that it sells, and they charge a lot. And if you're Microsoft or Meta, one of their big customers, and you've got your own in-house chip as well, you can negotiate a bit more aggressively because you've got alternatives you otherwise wouldn't have.
Is there like a huge time to build these chips? So if big techs are kind of investing in that, what's going to happen is they're going to come up with another technology which is more advanced. And by the time would your chip would it be able to cater to that?
Yeah, well, that's the risk. That's the risk. And I think the rate at which NVIDIA is charging forward really makes it challenging to keep up. And there's a reason why the only companies right now that are focused on designing their own chips are also the biggest and wealthiest companies in the world. But I think that's going to change to some degree because as more companies in different industries focus on AI and need more computing power to process their AI, they're going to realize as well that it makes sense for them to start thinking about how do their chips interact with their AI workloads and think about how do you gain as much efficiency as possible from the hardware that you're running on.
Got it. And these biggest players that you spoke about, can you name them and tell me how do you think or why did they reach the status that they are in right now, like being the most important players in the market?
Well, I think NVIDIA is by far the most important when it comes to AI semiconductors. And the reason is that NVIDIA has been investing in AI chips and the software around them now for 15 years. Long before most people were thinking about AI, the CEO of NVIDIA, Jensen Huang, was focused on this as a growth market. And people thought he was taking pretty risky bets for a while. And it's just in the last 2 years that it's become clear that, in fact, this is going to be an extraordinarily widely used product. And what looked like a risky bet then looks very prescient now. I think the other major players are companies like Broadcom and Marvell, which work with the big tech firms to design their own chips, because Google and Facebook and Microsoft, they have some expertise in chip design, but they also need to work with outside partners. And so if you look at Broadcom, for example, they've really surged in their growth the last year or two because they're a key partner for companies like Google in designing their own in-house processors.
Okay, got it. Can you talk about TSMC? Like, where are they right now?
Well, TSMC, they don't design any chips. They only manufacture them. And they manufacture 99% of the world's AI accelerators. It's an extraordinary market share. And it means that every other tech company in the world, really anyone who touches AI, anyone who uses ChatGPT, relies on chips that are made by TSMC in Taiwan. I think there's never been a moment in all of economic history, the entire history of the world, where technological progress has depended on the capabilities of not just one company, but just a handful of factories that are producing the AI chips that everyone else depends on.
Got it. And how long do you think they'll have this supremacy?
I wouldn't bet against TSMC. The expertise they've built up, the track record they have in driving technology forward, and the trust they've built with their customers is really pretty extraordinary. And so if you look at all their key customers, from NVIDIA to AMD to Broadcom, these customers bet their products on TSMC's ability to actually manufacture them. There's an extraordinary trust relationship there, and it's core to TSMC's success.
Great. So they would remain dominant for quite some time.
I think that's right. I think that's right.
Great. Speaking about these geopolitical tensions that's been happening and with US and China, so what kind of started this whole thing? And do you see a solution coming up in the future for this?
I think there are two key factors that started it. One is that China has been increasing its threats to Taiwan over the past decade, and it's been increasing its capabilities to actually threaten Taiwan as well. The vast buildup of the Chinese military is focused above all on the ability to either blockade or attack Taiwan. And because Taiwan produces 99% of the world's AI accelerator chips, that's a real problem for the world economy. So that's the first factor. The second factor is that for the last decade, since around 2014, the Chinese government has been pouring money into its chip industry using a whole range of subsidies that is intended to shift the chip supply chain to China. And right now, chips are the one thing that China can't produce at the cutting edge domestically. China relies on Taiwan, just like the rest of the world does, for cutting edge AI processors and smartphone processors. But Xi Jinping wants to change that. He wants to make China self-sufficient in semiconductors. And if he succeeds, it'll have really profound ramifications for the world economy and make the rest of the world's manufacturing dependent on Chinese chips. And both of those factors have induced the US, Japan, some European countries, Korea, to try to counteract them by a mix of subsidies and tariffs to reduce the risk that they become too dependent on China, and to reduce the risk that they're solely dependent on Taiwan in case China decides to disrupt Taiwan's ability to sell semiconductors.
Got it. So that's very interesting. How come China has not yet reached that? Why are they not able to make it?
Well, the first reason is that it's just very, very hard to produce cutting-edge chips. This is the most complex manufacturing humans have ever undertaken. The supply chain is extraordinarily sophisticated, and China's been investing for a decade, but it's got a lot of ways to go. The second reason is that the US, along with Japan and the Netherlands, have been actively trying to hold China back by declining to sell China the most advanced chip-making machines, which can go to Taiwan, but can't go to China. And if you can't get access to these chip-making tools, it's very, very hard to make advanced chips.
So what's happening is now with sanctions and restrictions happening. But isn't China a country who would come up with a solution despite that?
Well, we're going to see. I think China is devoting a lot of resources to trying to get around these restrictions. The challenge that China faces in the chip industry is that, unlike most industries where you try to improve by 5 or 10% a year, In the chip industry, you need to improve by 50% a year or you fall behind. And TSMC is very, very good at improving very, very rapidly. So China's making progress every year, but TSMC is making progress too. And so the gap between them has remained basically the same for the last 15 years. And so I would never bet against the Chinese, but I'd also never bet against the Taiwanese. And the Taiwanese are ahead right now. They're ahead in partnership with the rest of the world's key economies. And so I think China does face a real set of challenges the next couple of years as it tries to catch up.
And what about South Korea? Even they are also producers of chips, right? So where do they stand in this?
That's right. Yeah, so South Korea focuses more on memory chips than processors. So inside of every AI system, for example, there's an AI accelerator coupled with a type of chip called a high bandwidth memory. And the South Koreans are the world's leaders in the production of those chips. So right now, they're more of a partner with Taiwan rather than a direct competitor when it comes to the most important chips.
Okay. And I think even they have also been facing some tensions within the country. Right?
Well, it's been a very tumultuous month for Korea as well. And I think that's underscored for a lot of countries why a diversified supply chain is an important thing to have.
Got it. Let's just talk about India. So where does India stand in this whole race? Also, the reason why I'm asking is, so we have this vision called Viksit Bharat 2047, where by that year, we want to be a producer of semiconductors, electronic productions to happen. So where do you think we're placed in that? And do you think this is a vision we can achieve?
I think India is in the early stages of building out the chip industry. Until recently, there hadn't been a lot of investment, especially in the manufacturing side of the chip supply chain. But that's really changed in the past just a couple of years, driven both by the supply chain shifts we see internationally, as well as by the Indian government really focusing on this industry. And so now there's more investment than there ever has been in a number of different plants in different parts of the country, as well as I think more focus on the design of semiconductors, where India has long had a very large number of designers, but mostly working for foreign firms. And I think there's more focus now on building out India's own domestic ecosystem of chip design as well. If you look at countries like Taiwan or Korea, which are the industry leaders today, it took them decades to build out their chip industry. Starting in the 1970s, it wasn't really until the 2000s that they became world-class players. And so I think India is moving along the same trajectory. It's made a lot of progress the last couple of years, but it's important to recognize these are inevitably decades-long processes. And so we should expect continued development, but it's not going to go from an initial level to Taiwan's level overnight. This is inevitably going to take time.
Got it. And so where do you see the challenges that would be, impeding India's progress in this sector?
I think there are two sets of challenges that are primary. The first is talent, which every country faces talent challenges. And in the chip industry, you need lots of unique types of talent at every segment of the supply chain, which just takes time to build. And I think it is happening. And at this conference, for example, there's really extraordinary demonstration of the talent that does exist in chip design. Okay. But as India moves into chip manufacturing and testing and packaging, you need talent in all of those different disciplines, and they're all different. You need different educational backgrounds, different internships, different work training, and so that takes time to build out. That's the first thing. The second is infrastructure, where again, as you move into manufacturing and packaging and testing, there's different types of infrastructure you need, different chemicals and materials and tools, and all that is eminently buildable, but it takes time and it takes capacity to build out. So I think we're seeing that happening right now. But again, it can't happen overnight, and it's going to take a decade to build full scale.
Okay. But now with the advancement of technology and how the time is getting reduced for a lot of production, and a lot of investments is also happening in India for setting up these plants by these big tech players here. So is that something then you see that there would be an accelerated growth, or, we can produce them faster?
Well, I think growth has already accelerated, I would say. Relative to the previous trend, there's been a ton of investment the last couple of years. There's real activity happening. Real production is going to come online over the next couple of years. That's all real. But it's still going to take time. That's just the reality. A single plant can take 3 or 4 years to build once you start construction, and there's usually a couple of years of planning beforehand. So this industry is used to thinking in terms of decades. That's the time horizon over which plants are planned. And so for any country thinking about their strategy, they've got to think in terms of decades as well.
Got it. So do you think, so right now India has a lot of global collaborations to help, get there. So should we stick to being, say, a facilitator for producing these things, or should we focus on being now the innovators? Like from a practical angle, which is a better suited vision, I would say?
Well, I would say you can do both to some degree. I think India has a large talent base in chip design because it's developed investment from a whole variety of international firms in India. And that's been a huge asset. That means that India is arguably the world's first or second country in terms of chip design talent, right next to the United States. Many other countries in the chip industry don't have that. In Korea, for example, a lot of manufacturing expertise, but very little in chip design. So that's a great asset that India can build off of. But I think it's also right to say that the next step is to develop Indian brands and develop India's own chip design companies. And I think that's beginning to happen, but it requires building out a venture capital ecosystem. It requires making sure that the legal and regulatory environment is conducive. It requires different types of talent. And all that I think is developing right now, but there's more work to be done.
Got it. So when we are getting on to the production side, should we concentrate on the innovator ones, 2 nanometer, 3 nanometer, or should we start with more of a, an already established model?
I think on the manufacturing side, any new entrant is going to have to start in more established technologies. That's just the reality. And that's not just for India. If you look at what Europeans are investing in right now, they're investing in established technologies as well. Look at what's in Israel. Look at what's in Singapore. This is just the logical place to start. And you can build very successful businesses in established technologies. And I think what's more, people often think that established technologies are places where technology is not still advancing. That's actually not true. There's a lot of innovation on older process technologies that are being repurposed for new applications. And with AI, that's going to accelerate because you're going to use for certain types of use cases, older technologies, build new capabilities into them, and then put them in devices for AI purposes. And so I don't think we should look at older process technologies and say, this is not innovative. Quite the contrary. There's a lot of innovation that can and must happen on these technologies. And that makes it a very natural place for India to start.
So can we talk about Intel as well? So we've seen a lot of things happening, or say the innovation that we expected or the growth that we expected. Probably in the last decade, we've seen a little bit, just stumbling here and there. So why is that? And can Intel still recover from a lot of things that's happened?
Well, I think there's a couple of challenges that Intel has faced. I think first, over the last decade, the culture of innovation has deteriorated. And I think the leadership realizes that and is trying to find a way to build up the culture of innovation again. But that's created long-term challenges for the company because a lot of the products that used to drive Intel's growth have fallen behind their competitors. Companies like AMD or NVIDIA are now bigger than Intel and growing their market share. And so Intel faces a real challenging couple of years as it tries to reinvigorate its products and its culture and position itself better for a world of AI, where the reality is Intel missed the boat on AI, and they're trying to catch up now from a position of weakness.
And that's what we spoke about, the catch-up part. Is that something that can practically happen, considering how now everyone's just running and speeding up their progress?
I think it's possible in certain industries. I think for AI accelerators, where NVIDIA is the leader, Intel has a very, very hard pathway to winning market share there. But in other businesses like CPUs, the types of processors that are inside of computers or used in traditional data centers, Intel still has a lot of capabilities there. It's fallen behind a bit behind AMD over the last couple of years, but there's plenty of scope to catch up there if they regain their focus.
And how does AI and quantum computing have a significant say in this whole semiconductor production space?
I think we're already seeing companies embrace AI to design and manufacture better chips in a really significant way. The chip design process, for example, is going to get much more automated as a result of AI. And by the same token, AI is being used in manufacturing to gather more data about how manufacturing is done, tweak the recipes, and make more effective chips as a result. There's a lot of excitement about applying AI to make chips that in turn make AI more capable.
Yeah, and similarly, you have the digital twin concept for the semiconductor space. How useful is that? And will that be something which can help India, kind of speed up the whole process of production?
I think we're seeing digital twins being used across the manufacturing process for semiconductors, and I think that's only going to accelerate. I think it'll help India. I think it'll help every country that's operating in manufacturing to optimize their processes and to identify problems in the manufacturing system.
And yesterday you were telling me about how you're here to meet a lot of companies and people who are building it. So anything interesting that you found so far? You met some interesting people.
Well, I guess I'm struck by the amount of excitement in the Indian chip industry. I think that sounds a little bit vague, but it's actually extraordinarily important because it's drawing young people in, it's drawing in investment into the industry, and that's exactly what you need to build an industry over time.
Got it. Now, any players you can talk about, like anyone that struck you?
Oh, I don't know that I've got a single player to talk about. No one in particular.
Okay, got it. A little bit about yourself, Chris. So you have written books on the Russian political scenes and everything. And from that, you moved on to the chip industry. Yeah, just tell me, how did you get into this whole business?
Well, I first got into the history of computing actually by looking at what went wrong in the Russian economy, which in the early days of the Cold War was a leader in science and technology, the first person in space, the first rocket in space, and fell behind precisely because they couldn't do computing at a competitive level. And one of the key challenges in the Russian computing industry was their chips. They couldn't make effective chips. And that's what got me interested in understanding how the chip industry first developed.
Got it. And why is that Russia was still not anywhere heard in this whole market, right?
Well, the big challenge that Russia's faced is that it's tried to make chips all on its own. It's tried to be self-sufficient in semiconductors, and that's just been the wrong strategy. In reality, you need global interconnections to build the scale that chip making requires, but also to harness technological improvements that are happening around the world. So the successful strategies that Taiwan, that Japan, that Korea have embraced have been about integration into the global supply chain rather than self-sufficiency.
Got it. And Chris, what next for you? Are you working on another book right now?
I'm staying very busy tracking all of the changes in the chip industry with the supply chain shifts, the AI boom. There's a whole lot going on.
Got it. And one last question. Who are you secretly rooting for in this war of the most critical technology?
Well, I think I'm rooting for even better AI products that are going to drive economic growth and make our lives more exciting. I think we're just at the cusp of seeing AI actually deployed. I think it's going to be an exciting couple of years ahead of us.
Got it. And any country you're betting on?
Well, I think, the reality is that we're going to need lots of countries working together. It's going to be chips that are probably made in Taiwan with memory chips that are probably made in Korea, designed in other countries. You've got to have this international supply chain working together. I think we've got a situation where there is bifurcation between China and the rest of the international supply chain, but the coordination between all the other players is as important as ever as the technology gets more complex.
Got it. Thank you so much, Chris, for taking the time. This has truly been an insightful discussion.
Well, thank you.